Okay, you're good to go. Okay, you're good to go.
Okay, sounds good.
Steph, I'm not hearing anything.
I just hear you.
Dan, can you hear anything?
I can hear
No.
you.
No, I can just hear you, Lynn.
Dan, can you
Okay.
hear me?
Same with me. I can't hear staff.
Yeah.
Dan,
Yeah, I'm here.
you can hear Mayor Berube?
This is Julie. I can hear Mayor Berube.
Yes.
I'm Dan. I'm not hearing Steph.
Yeah, she says she can't hear anything.
Um,
I'm texting her.
she's not even on, I don't think.
I think she's going to re-sign on.
Maybe
Yeah.
that's it.
I think that's a self-fulfilling prophecy for Steph.
Well said, Meg.
Okay, here she comes.
Okay, can everybody hear me now?
Yes.
My goodness, I'm sorry. I have no idea what happened. I said connect the meeting and then everybody went silent.
Okay,
I
we're
could,
recording.
I could see what was going on and I kept trying to speak and anyway, I'm sorry about that. That's strange. It's good to see everybody. I'm glad to finally be on so we can all talk and get going on this meeting. So I'd like to welcome everybody. It's been a month. I hope that, so you can't, okay. It's been a month, so I hope that everybody's had a chance to think about conservation and I'm excited to discuss it tonight. Is Meg on yet?
She is.
All right, we are gonna have
I'm here.
the Pledge of Allegiance and the thought from Meg to start the meeting off. So go ahead, Meg. Meg?
Sorry, little fire to put out with my children. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So I've been reading a lot of Maya Angelou for Black History Month. And what I have drawn from all of her writing, I don't know if any of you guys have ever read any of her writing, but her autobiography, Why Does the Caged Bird Sing? In that, she talks about what I find a lot of us are lacking, which is inclusion. And I don't want to virtue signal because I can exclude as good as anybody. But just my one thought, especially tonight as we talk about conservation and the fact that North Ogden is very diverse economically, that we think inclusion and constantly have that word in our head, inclusion. How can we make sure every part of our community feels like they're worth being looked at and worth making sure they're heard? So that's all I wanted to say.
And then the flag is up for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Okay, I do the Boy Scouts, so I could say, repeat after me. I pledge allegiance to the flag,
Of the United States of America,
to the
and
republic
to the republic of which it stands, one nation,
Nation
under God,
under God,
invisible,
indivisible, with
and
liberty
justice
and justice for all.
for all.
which is saying inclusion.
Yes.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Meg. All right, guys, we will start with our consent agenda and consideration to approve the January 27th General Plan Steering Committee minutes. Did everybody have a chance to go over them? Does anyone have any comments or anything that they saw?
Yeah, so when I printed it up, it says consideration to approve the October 28th, 2020 General Plan Steering Committee. Was there another one that came up?
Came up, let's see, for tonight, it's the 27th.
It was the
Minutes.
28th of October, 2020 is what's in my draft notes.
If you just scroll down on tonight's agenda, you see it says January 27th, 2021.
Yeah, what we got in our notes when I downloaded it today is approval of the October 28th, 2020. So unless I looked at it,
I don't know.
Mine shows last meetings.
Yeah,
okay.
mine shows last meeting, and I printed it from the email, and I have last meetings.
Okay. I just wondered if everybody else was that way, so.
That was a trick, Julie. You passed.
Thank you. Yay, I passed something.
So did everybody get a chance to go through it then? That's got the correct ones or had a chance to go through the correct ones? If so, we're looking for someone to make a motion to approve.
I've looked through the minutes and I don't find anything that I disagree with, so I suggest we approve them as written.
Okay, do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Thank you. So all those, I am like struggling for my words tonight, guys. Does everyone agree? Do we have any who oppose? All right, then we will approve those minutes and move on to number 2, which is public comments. Lynn, do we have any public comments tonight?
I don't see any hands raised.
All right, we'll give it a minute.
Yeah, there's only one person, and so I think you can go ahead and go.
Okay. It's Brenda. Hi, Brenda. So we will move on then to our agenda. Number 3 is a discussion regarding conservation easement, presenter Rob Scott. So is Rob here?
He is.
I am, thank you.
All right.
So what, if you'll recall, the committee asked me to put together some information with respect to how our general plan addresses conservation easements. And the memo, I've given you a little background with respect to that. There are 2 identified areas that show the potential for conservation easements in the general plan. And they're shown as a crosshatched area. And I shared the general plan map with you as well to identify where those areas are. So they're in the Coldwater neighborhood as well as the Old Town neighborhood. It's kind of hard to see on that map, but that crosshatched area is the ones that were identified. The second thing is that as part of the goals for each of the neighborhoods, there were some specific goals and some strategies that were identified for these neighborhoods. And the strategies that are referenced talk about the conservation of the agricultural heritage and preserving rural character as kind of a general statement regarding these potential conservation easements. So I have also shared with you how that the general plan is an aspirational document, and that as part of that, there are some strategies that are identified for each of the 2 neighborhoods, and they vary just a little bit. So the suggestion tonight was going to be to take a look at those strategies and identify those that the committee is interested in potentially pursuing. I wanted to just share a little bit of a personal insight with respect to these conservation easements. I am privileged to have been part of a family, I should say been, I still am part of a family that had established a conservation easement, and they worked with, this was property that was agriculture and nature, and it is some mountain land property up in Summit County. We work with the Nature Conservancy people who made application for funding from the state of Utah, and we were successful in obtaining that conservation easement. And it's been a huge blessing to our family because that money has provided us with a resource to be able to maintain our ranch. The other thing that I wanted to share with respect to that is that as part of the establishment of these conservation easements, there's a wide degree of latitude in the establishment of these easements. So the easement itself has, in essence, a document that identifies what the easement is going to be used for, the parameters of it. So for example, in our family, we have a fairly amount of land, and it encompasses all of it except for 38 acres. So within that 38 acres, our family has the opportunity to do some things. We built some yurts and have a little bit more developed activity in that. The rest of the property is identified as mountain land property that is used for agriculture, and we lease it out for some sheep grazing and that type of thing. So, and then the last thing that I was going to share with you is that these kinds of projects, in my mind, this committee could definitely serve as the champions for this type of activity. The general plan was established back in 2015. That's when it was adopted. There's been some discussion over that period of time, but no one has really, I'll use the word, taken the bull by the horn, so to speak, and said, hey, we really want to do something about it. So I applaud this committee for your bringing up the subject and for your efforts. but it is going to take some champions to really move this thing forward based on the parameters that you establish. The last thing is that I read the email that we got today that described the conservation easement that Davis County established along the shoreline of the Great Salt Lake. And there's definitely some parts of that document that are general in nature that talk about the establishment of easements and their creation and the differentiation. All of those things, I think, are also a nice resource for the committee as you go forward. With that, I'm happy to answer questions and or do whatever the committee would like. But again, I would suggest that you take a look at those strategies and identifies those that you think that you'd like to pursue, and then either establish a subcommittee or something along that line to start pursuing some of these activities.
Okay.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
I had a question. So Rob, I sent you the slideshow that I saw about Case Creek being created in Davis County. And I saw a couple things like you brought about your family's conservation easement. It took a grant to make that happen. And that was the same with Davis County. It looked like it was a hefty grant to make that conservation happen, especially Case Creek and getting it to look nice. And then there was just a litany of groups that jumped on board to also make that happen. So I was wondering if that's something that is going to need in North Ogden, or do you just get to make a zone and that's it and we're done?
Well, the legal document that establishes the conservation easement, you saw that particular easement was done through, I think, the Nature Conservancy. So they were a partner in the establishment of that particular conservation easement. And the way it works is when they get, if the state will fund the conservation easement, what they end up doing is they have a fee that then takes a portion of that money that is going to come from the state to accomplish the easement itself. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense as far as the funding and stuff.
Yeah, so you would, if you want to partner with somebody like the Trust for Public Lands or Nature Conservancy, those are two of the most prominent ones that people can work with in the establishment of these easements. And of course, it has a lot to do with the property owners have to be involved with something like that as well.
Rob, I have some questions about that. So the one you're talking about that your family owns is kind of mountain property, right?
Yes.
It's not within, the confines of a city. And the one in Davis County appears to me to be an open area on the outskirts of a city also. So I think that we're talking about two different concepts, because the ones that were suggested are within the city limits and there's already housing and populace in those areas. So I don't know what kind of direction we ought to take on that. I don't see anybody coming in and saying, I'm going to give you a bunch of money to maintain this conservation area, when it really doesn't fit that kind of a description.
Well, like I say, there's a number of different types of easements, and there are some parameters within the law for the establishment of these conservation easements. So if you get to the point where you want to pursue it, I would suggest sitting down with somebody that's had some direct experience with that, like the Nature Conservancy or Trust for Public Lands. And they would definitely be able to give us some additional background on, depending on what it is that is trying to be accomplished in North Ogden. There's no restriction that the property necessarily would either be in an incorporated or unincorporated area.
So it looks like the ones in our city that we've identified we're looking more at the square footage of property that can be developed there rather than making a whole area saying this is conservation and we're going to make it public access or something.
Yeah, again, it's just the identification as to how you want to pursue it.
I think right now we're discussing pursuing it in a zone. I think that's where we've been working at, and tonight maybe really coming up with the definition of what we see that area that we've zoned conservation to look like.
I would agree with that we're not looking at something that we're saying, well, we need some state or federal money to make this a conservation area. We're looking at more as the zoning aspect of it.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the great thing about the conservation easements is moving forward once we get the zones established and start kind of working on different parts of the map, we can start using conservation easements to look at areas of parks, where the creek is. You know, I know that was something that Grant was really concerned about. And so I think that it's something that we can use in the future as we, you know, move on to parks and different parts of the city.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, you know, like you said, the parts where there's creeks, where you want to maintain that as a general open area for the citizens.
Yeah.
But as well as this aspect of limiting lot size.
Yeah, I agree. Julie?
So I read, Meg, thank you for sending this. I read through this, and there was one part that really stood out to me that I think could possibly work in North Ogden, and it's called the conservation development. And basically what this is a design, is a strategy for one piece of land. And if you don't move anything around, it's all done. So like, let's say Coldwater Creek is in an area where we've got some build up, but there's still some open spaces. And you can actually move more houses into where it's already been built up, and still right next to it, can't speak today, sorry, and still maintain your conservation areas. And I really, this concept really, and it's in the little leaflet list you sent me, I thought this would work well for North Ogden because we have little pockets of sensitive areas right now. You know, we've got a lot of build out, but there are places, Meg talked about, you know, protecting Coldwater Creek. And this would be a perfect way to protect Coldwater Creek, is in the places where it hasn't been developed yet. You know, maybe they can develop further over and still protect the creek. I didn't have a chance to fully put it all together, but it's just when there's a specific amount of land that needs to be preserved, which is kind of what we're going to be doing. We're going to preserving specific lands. So like up in we could do this both down in town and up on the mountain. So, you know, if there's places where we know there's a watershed up on the mountain, we can make that, and Rob can most probably make this sound far better than I can, but we can protect that area and allow maybe a little bit bigger build or more homes in the non-sensitive land.
Yeah, I agree, Julie. I think that's something that we need to look at and really tackle some areas that we believe need to have a conservation easement on. Maybe that's something we can all just kind of start looking at and identifying ourselves, and we can bring that back and have a specific meeting talking about these areas specifically and what we see that is looking like. I mean, what do you think about that?
You know, I think people would have to read the conservation development part of what Meg sent to us.
Yeah.
Because I read through it and I got to that part and it was like, wait. And as I look at that, I'm going, wow, that could possibly work for us.
Yeah,
So,
I think that's great. And I think that we should definitely make that a discussion and something that we tackle and try to get down, and because I know it's important to a lot of us. And hopefully tonight we can incorporate some of that into a conservation zone that will, work up on the mountain and the foothills that we as a committee have identified as where we see a big conservation zone, a big swathing zoned area. And I think that would be great. Rob, I have a question pertaining to what you were telling us about and the hillside protection area in our general plan. It says one of the strategies is maintain the agreement with Harrisville and Pleasant View. Where could we get that agreement? What is that agreement exactly? What is that?
John Call, I don't know if he's online with us tonight. He might have a little better idea about that, but I know that we have some agreements with those cities as it relates to potential annexation boundaries, but I'm not aware of any other thing with those other communities. So
John just barely joined us, so you may want to ask him.
Okay, John, we were just talking, Rob had just done his presentation and talked about the conservation easements and a little bit about the hillside protection plan or hillside area of I guess it's the neighborhood map. And as it sits in the general plan right now, which is part of what we'll be talking about tonight, falls in what has been identified as the hillside neighborhood. And reading under that, it says maintain the agreement with Harrisville and Pleasant View. I'm wondering what that agreement is and if that's a document we could look at, because if there's agreements that we have with those cities based on this area of that we're identifying tonight as conservation, I would imagine we need to know what that is.
I'll have to do some research. I'm not sure what those agreements are. I don't know. So I'll have to dig into that.
Okay, yeah, because it says revisit the document with each adjoining community every 5 years, which would have been last year based on when the general plan was done in 2015. So maybe,
Okay.
I guess that'll be something we need to look at.
Yeah, and what page is that on in the plan?
87.
Okay, I'll make note of that and look and see what I can figure out.
All right. Anybody else have anything for Rob Scott before we move on to number 4?
So let me just share a couple things. If we're talking about, am I on?
Yes.
Okay. So if we're talking strictly about zoning regulations and that, there's a couple things that are in process with respect to this area. And then there's some potential for doing some additional work with our zoning code to work with our hillside properties. We have a very generalized standard in our zoning ordinance that talks about sensitive lands. And it's a very general document. I've been working with the Planning Commission over the last year to create a sensitive lands overlay district that would identify the specific concerns that these properties have. And as development comes along, that private property owners are going to have to conduct specific studies in order to identify how much of their land actually is, how much of that land qualifies to actually develop. So as part of that, one of the things that we've talked about that we just haven't gotten to, and this discussion might be the impetus for it, and that is that our current ordinance does not have what we call a cluster ordinance. And cluster ordinances, typically what they do is they, within the boundaries of a project, they would transfer density within that in order to preserve, could be agriculture, it could be sensitive lands, it could be any number of things. So that's something to consider with respect to that. And one of the things that that we have to be careful about is making sure that that we have a reasonable standard for how much of that land is going to be available for development versus the ability to actually restrict private property rights. So that's a big topic, and it is a lot of hard work to be able to come up with something that would be a reasonable kind of a regulation. John Call, do you have some further comments about that?
No, it's just that it obviously it's a delicate balance on, you know, or police powers versus property rights, and we just want to make sure that we're making the right decision.
So I'd like to, one of the things that you all are talking about is that preserving corridors along the various stream beds. And I strongly support that and have with respect to several projects that have been before the City Council and the Planning Commission. And just to give you an idea, when I was working in Medford, Oregon, one of the things that we ended up doing is that one of the things that really concerns me is when we end up with allowing development to back onto these stream beds instead of making them available to all of the public that is in a particular neighborhood. So the way you do that, it requires a little bit of an investment on the part of the developer, but instead of having homes that back onto these streams, what you do is you put a modified roadway along both sides of the stream and then lots across the way. That way, it's a very easy circumstance for the existing neighborhood and others who want to walk along those stream beds or trails to be able to have that opportunity.
Yeah, I agree with that. I have some concerns that we're a tad behind the 8 ball as far as Coldwater Creek goes. I mean, so I am concerned at how that will work itself out. Right now, the developer is in the process of trying to get permits to dig up and move the creek into existing backyards so he can build more. And he is about 10 to 20 feet off the creek right now with some of these cottages. So yeah, anything we can do to prevent that from happening in the future would be fantastic, because that's already done. And it's sad. So I'm hoping that we can come up with some plans that will really, you know, put us into a good place to avoid, and we're not, you know, trying to catch up and fix things after. Julie?
Yeah, I just have a question for Rob. When they turn in a plat map for like their subdivision, they show where the water runs through that subdivision, whether it be, you know, a stream or a canal or anything like that. Do they do that right now when they turn in their plat map?
Yes.
Okay. Because I know there's a bill right now on there, out on the HB 107, which is defining that to where they have to put every kind of water conveyance on, whether it be cold water, whether it be a canal, whether it be a city pipeline. They're going to have to, and it's moving through the House. It's moved through the House into the Senate. So it'll be interesting to see how that affects future development in places, because we'll be able to maybe see more closely as a city exactly where the water is, right with the plat map. So I just wondered if we if that was already on there, so thank you. And I think, Steph, you're right about Coldwater, but I think there's some places where maybe we can go in and do some of that. And that's where this conservation development comes in. And I know up on the hillside, there has to be some kind of watersheds, and there's, you know, there's water up there that needs to be protected, you know, whether it's for a future well or it's just general. And so that's why I think the conservation development, I'm going to push this because I really like it. But I think that's something that we can really use just about anywhere in the city, no matter
Yeah.
what the zone is.
I agree, you know, and you know, like the creek that runs through Barker Park is just, it's beautiful, but it's so damaged and not taken care of. We need to identify these areas and make sure that they're being taken care of and used, you know, by our community so that it can always be there for families to go enjoy. I think we have some wonderful pockets around the community. So I look forward to that conversation. I think it will be great to start identifying and really tackling that so we're not behind the 8 ball. All right, that was anything else, Rob, or anybody have any more questions for Rob? Okay, well, thank you for that, and I look forward, you know, to being able to identify some sensitive areas and some conservation easement areas. So with that, we will move on to our agenda number 4, discussion regarding finalizing the definition of the conservation zone. And I think we started the discussion last month, and it seems that we've already, some of the discussion tonight will cross over into that. So Meg gave us the or sent the email out for everyone to read. I guess I'd like to just start with getting a feel of where everybody's at with their thoughts on it. Development, what you kind of see as development in the areas we've identified as conservation zone. So I hope everybody's got that map. Lynn, can you switch it over to the map that we went through as a committee?
Was that the one from the last meeting?
Oh, yes. Sorry, I thought it was on here.
Yeah, let me see if I can find that.
We all know it's kind of along, it's basically the foothills, and the area, it is still the area that is actually probably able to be developed in the area we have identified as a conservation zone is going to be the Marriott. Yep, there we go. So all of the green. So did everybody have a chance to think about it? What are your thoughts? We just need to start throwing them out there so we know where to start a discussion. And I'd like to hear what you guys think. I mean,
I know what I think. Can I?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So just a couple of observations I made looking at Layton City's makeup. And I mean, you guys can obviously disagree with how I interpret it, but people built up into, I don't know if you are familiar with Layton, but they built up to, there's a forest, if you will, called Fernwood. And there's a lot of houses up there. And they are literally to the line of the Forest Service land. So the only conservation they have on their mountainside is that which was allotted by the Forest Service. But when you go down into the city, running right through the center is Case Creek. And when I looked at that, and I look at the way North Ogden is, how it's comprised, I don't know how much control we would have in making a zone up along the mountainside. I don't know how realistic that is. And I don't know how it goes with property rights, because from what I saw, that property is all owned. can we only make a conservation zone off of land that we North Ogden owns? And the second thing I was wondering, the devil you know is preferred to the devil you don't. And so I wonder if with the land that Randy Marriott is looking to put a number of units on, is it better to annex that land into North Ogden and make it a conservation district because we know the council in North Ogden? Or do you not even entertain that and just leave it to Weber County, the devil we don't know, and how those commissioners would foresee building there? I guess it comes down to, I don't know the amount of control we would have in making a conservation zone.
I think that's great. I think we have identified that even though it is still annexed into Weber County, that we would be best to come up with a zone, because if it is ever to be annexed into it, they would be annexing it into the zone that we identify it as. If I understand that correct. Is that right, John? That would be their option if they wanted to annex it, and we had.
Okay, so within the parameters that we set, like, okay.
Yes.
So in that idea, you would want to annex it in because then we have the parameters set. Okay.
Well, I guess that would be up to them if they wanted the parameters that we set, or if Weber County, staying in Weber County benefits what they're looking to do, if I understand correctly.
So what you're saying is that if we identify it as a conservation zone and they later want to annex it into the city, then our guidelines would apply and they would have to do that. Is that right?
That's my understanding. And that's why I think it's important that we really come up with a definition of what conservation zone means to us. Could mean a lot of things. And so we need to narrow it down, and I'm hoping we can come up with some kind of a definition that we see fits North Ogden, that works for that area. It will then be presented to the council and they will have the final say. But I think it's important that we as a committee identify what we see conservation zone as. What does that look like to us? I mean, when we went through this map, that's what we identified, this area and the area that is at current Weber County. But we know that he is interested in possibly annexing into North Ogden, and we know that there are big plans. I don't know that our decision should be based off of that. I think our decision should be based off of what we see that and how we see that working for our community. So, I mean, if we want, we can start with what Weber County. John, what exactly is Weber County's, what building guidelines do they have set right now for that area? Do you know? I know you know. Would you mind telling us?
So they, it's actually currently, well, just in conversations, they would probably be willing to a 1 unit per acre. So 1 residential unit per acre in that area. I believe right now it's still zoned A5, which is 5 acre parcels, but they would most likely, if approached by the landowner, reduce that to 1 per acre.
Okay.
And I think for me, my own perspective on conservation and what I saw is there is a balancing act between how we see conservation and also respect property owner rights. And I think that balance is what I would hope to achieve when talking about a conservation zone.
Yes, I agree. One other thing I'd like to know, John Call, as we discussed, that I think would influence at least do we have a water table study? Has there been a water table study of this area?
So
I would hope that there has been, and that we've got it.
So we do have several hazard studies, and as people come in for development, we do require them to do some additional specific geotechnical studies, which would include identifying water tables, things like that. We do have some areas of the city, for example, where they're not allowed to put basements in because the water table's too high. And this area has been identified as one that will need to incorporate some what they call groundwater recharge activity. So if it develops, they'll have to collect stormwater and get it back into the ground in a way that complies with Utah standards, you know, the state environmental standards, so that we're keep not depleting the resources, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it does. Okay.
Hey, John, this is Dan. Question for John. If a developer wanted to develop on land that was in the county and had no services, would they be able to develop? Wouldn't they have to annex into either Pleasant View or North Ogden?
The answer differs. And what I mean by that is, it depends a little bit on the service districts. The city's current policy for utilities and our ordinances would allow them to connect. They would pay an out of city rate. We have talked in the past about creating an ordinance that basically says if you want to utilize certain city utilities, you have to be in the city. But we haven't implemented that yet. So that's probably the thing we should look at is that the right the right next step, because that would help with negotiations with anyone who was considering developing in the county in any part of the city, as opposed to just one specific area. I do think the courts would probably let us do that for water and things, but when you come to sewer and stormwater, I'm not sure the cities would let or the courts would let us draw that line in the sand, because stormwater, for example, always has to go downhill. There's not another way to get it out of cities, and we obviously we wouldn't want Harrisville and Far West and Pleasant View to tell us that our stormwater couldn't pass through their city. So it's a delicate line we'd be walking, but water system, we would definitely be within our rights to say you can't use the city system unless you annex in.
So the thoughts that I'm having is, so if the county at this moment would offer 1 unit per acre, would we be willing to, I mean, do we see higher density than that? Does anybody see?
Based on previous behavior, yeah, I can see 1 acre not happening.
No, I'm saying
smaller.
No, I'm saying not, I'm saying, could we, like, is that something we would want? I personally don't know that I would. I mean, the clustering is interesting to me, but I just, you know, I guess I'm trying to decide, do we kind of look at a conservation zone that somewhat mirrors what Weber County is going to offer? Are there benefits? Do we as a committee see higher density than the 1 unit per acre up there in what we would consider a conservation zone? Okay, there's a lot of you on here. Just give it to me. I'm
just thinking in my head, like,
yeah, this is
the answer to that.
I don't want to worry about what council members or whatever. I want us to say, what do we see it as? When you look up there, can we see it?
I see it as open, like very similar to how the pole patch is, you know, larger areas, more green space. But the question is access as well. I mean, you can say a home for 1 acre, but what's that public access?
Yeah, the traffic and services concern me up that high and how that would all work itself out.
On that. I want it as spacious as possible when I hear conservation up on the mountain. Down in the city where there's a lot more building, I can understand you can't have, one house per 1 acre, but looking at the North Ogden mountainside and taking into the water issues, I don't see how you put more high density housing there. Conservation to me means
Yeah.
conserve.
Ultimately, to me, it
space,
would be
or,
less than that, but if Weber County's gonna offer them that, how do we look? I'm just trying to.
That's a really
see-
good point. That's a really good point, though. Yeah. If they can just go to Weber County and
If they can get this from Weber County, do we mirror Weber County because we think having them annex and giving us some control is to our benefit? Do we see higher density and accommodate what they're, maybe something with what they're looking at? That's what I'm looking for from you guys.
Yeah. So, Steph,
Yeah.
I love this article that Meg sent because it's got a lot of information on it. We keep talking conservation easement. We need to make sure we understand what conservation easement is, because this says that conservation is a tool that's used a lot for protecting sensitive lands. A conservation easement is the purchase of development rights for a piece of property that keeps a parcel of land undeveloped for perpetuity. The buyer is usually either a conservation group or a government entity. The seller of the rights is the landowner. So,
Yeah, I mean, but we're not
the
talking
city
about a conservation easement.
yeah, but if you go into that, somebody has to buy that conservation easement piece of land, if I read it right, which means that either the city does or some conservation group comes in and saves the day.
Yeah.
When I go back to the conservation development, that allows us to determine where the sensitive lands are and work with the developer to say, look, we see this as sensitive land, okay, and this is our reasons why. But this land right next to it is not as sensitive, that we don't see this. So maybe you allow a couple or more houses in this one particular area to preserve the conservation of the sensitive land. You still have open space and lots of it, but you're more in control of it right now because, and nobody has to put any money out other than, of course, the developments, but you work that into your zoning strategies. And so what we would need more than a conservation easement is a conservation development where we could sit down with Mr. Marriott, and hopefully he was in a good mood that day, and he could see the benefit of saying, wait, if I leave this land open, I'm preserving the sensitive nature of it, it's allowing the access, and I get a few more homes than I would if I was in the county. And if we put that up there, I think it would help. So just
No, I agree. And that's what I'm wondering. Okay, so you can see possibly more, but done in a specific way, maybe in a clustering.
Yes. Yeah, this is Dan. Julie, your comments were spot on. And I think that I heard Rob in his presentation talk about a cluster ordinance that it doesn't exist in the city. And clustering development would be a good resolution for property rights owners to cluster their developments with higher density and then conserve open space in other parts of the land that they own, so that you can have a win-win situation.
Yeah, okay, so I agree with where we're talking about now. I can see this, so I think it's something that we need to explore as a discussion with everybody. I'd like to find let's see, I'm gonna look and see if I can find a picture that shows what clustering looks like. So based on what you said, Julie, I'm thinking like if conservation zone, if it was something like, John, you're gonna have to help me with this. I'm trying to pinpoint this in and bring this into what we're trying to do.
Can I read what it says in this? Because it says, the overall density of the site does not change. If 51-acre lots were to be allowed on a 50-acre piece of land and the units were designed on half-acre lots, the overall density of the 50 acres remains 50 units. So,
Okay.
so it's not, and that's with this conservation development, it allows us to work with the developer rather than, constantly going at each other saying, well, no, I own this land, I want to be able to do it. It's a way for this developer to provide a lot of sensitive lands protection, but still make, I guess I could say, still make the money that he wants to and still be able to develop it in a way that keeps the city up on the hill where we need to be. And as they were saying, as Rob was saying, we've got some issues up there that now we're really looking into that this might totally work with, because we can say, hey, this land it's too, you can't build on here. It's just too sensitive.
Yeah.
But let's look at it. So I think,
I agree.
I feel like I'm saying a lot and everybody's being really quiet.
No, I
but
appreciate
I
it.
would take a minute, if you can, to open Meg's document because it's very interesting in what they
No,
do.
I did. Yeah, I did. I read it this afternoon. I like it. And I also know that we have talked about putting together some kind of a conservation development together in with concert, for areas along the creek as well. I think that needs to be done for the whole general city, but I think that we can use wording and some of the standards that you're explaining in what we see as a conservation zone. And so I want us to try to identify that tonight and pull that we could use into zoning standards. And I also think the conservation development, I think that could also be something that we can work on as a committee as well. And I don't mean to keep trying to push that down the road. I know that right now, getting the zones identified, the zoning standards identified, and to the council will allow us to, okay, what's the word we're trying to do? With the zones and the general plan, we've talked about it. Someone help me. Where they can't just change the zoning. Like once we set it, that's what it sets at.
Vesting, you want to vest
Yes, we're trying to vest it. So I want us to be able to get that done and then go back in and start looking at conservation specific little areas, the conservation development types of things, if that makes sense. Does that make sense? So I think I want to do all of that. Let's use it and incorporate it into what we see as a conservation zone and the standards and getting that more defined. And I think the clustering works great. I love the idea of, you're explaining it exactly how you see it. So how do we word that? And does anyone disagree or agree besides us four? Did that make sense, Julie? Do you see, because everything you're saying is spot on and it's yes. So let's figure out what we can tackle, identify, define, and get in front of our city council right now to move forward.
Yeah, I'd like to know more about the clustering. I don't know if Dan knows more about that, or Rob can speak to how that's been done in other areas.
It's actually also identified in the hillside neighborhood of our general plan, the clustering. It's not specific, but it does mention that and talk about that.
So I'll just chime in real quick. We're working on a cluster ordinance with Hyde Park City, if any of you know where Hyde Park is. And they're much more rural than North Ogden, but it involves about 500 acres in the foothills, similar to what's going on up in our foothills. I'd be happy to input any information that we're gathering and working with in that, because I think it's really important to accomplish conservation of open space that the community has access to in a trail system up in that area. And a developer should be trying to create some kind of a community development that everyone has access to, but then through the cluster ordinance, the developer maintains his property rights. So it's a very fair way to develop if you properly plan it out. And good land planning and good city leaders are where all of this can happen.
Can you
How,
explain what
sorry,
a cluster? Sorry. Dan, can you explain more what that means, what it looks like? What is a cluster ordinance?
Well, basically would take, let's say you take 100 acres just for easy figuring purposes. And the overall overlaying ordinance of the city is 10,000 square foot lots. Or let's just keep it simple, 3 units per acre would be what the ordinance overlay is on that land to be developed. So you could do 3 units per acre on the overall land, and then you could have cluster developments that would have 10 units per acre. And then you would have open space that compensates for the smaller lots. And that way you take sensitive land that is, you have an undevelopable ordinance of 30% slope where you can't develop, and that is protected land already through city ordinance. But you might have land that is developable that the community might consider sensitive. And I would think sensitive and accessible would be synonymous words because that's where the community has access to the land that is developed, and the developer can give that land to the community for accessibility and sensitivity, and in turn he gets smaller lots in certain areas to develop, so he maintains his property rights. Does that make sense?
yes, it sounds very appealing. How does it go wrong? Where does it go wrong?
Well, it goes wrong because
not be implemented.
Communities have a hard time wrapping arms around having a 5,000 square foot lot up on the hillside around, in a 5 acre development. I don't know if I'm making sense, but you could have 50 acres of open space, and then you could have 200 units in a 5 acre plot, and you could have the same density, but it's just clustered. So your development costs are less, so there's an advantage to the developer, and the community benefits because they have more open space that the whole community has access to.
Yeah, this makes a lot of sense for this area and what we've talked about. I'm actually reading cluster subdivisions. There's an implementation. I've just some information on it. So I'm wondering if we narrow it in with, at this point, saying the same 1 unit per acre, same as Weber County, but under a cluster ordinance, cluster subdivision ordinance. And we can, if that is something that the council approves and also agrees with us, we can further define that in.
Let me clarify that a little bit. You would have to have a zone that the North Ogden City would allow the developer to come into that involves a cluster ordinance. So you can't govern what the county is going to allow. You'd have to go to the county to create a cluster ordinance in the county.
Yeah, no, I realize that. I'm just basing it off of what the county's already offering. We just want to have something set up. So as he comes to the city and says, look, I'd like to annex in, if I annex in, and at that point we can say, great, this is what we've identified this land as being under the conservation zone, which comes with a cluster ordinance. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
So I'm not, so, but we need to start with what density it would be, right? An overall
Yeah.
density under a
And that's
cluster
the-
ordinance.
Right, and that's the city ordinance, not the county ordinance.
No, but
So-
I was just kind of using the county's density right now as maybe our baseline. And do we want to offer more? Are we, because I don't know, maybe they would still want to annex if we're offering the same density as the county. Do we want to go more? Going
Yeah.
less doesn't benefit anyone, so we don't want to go less. If
And then
we're,
you have to, right, and you also have to remember that Pleasant View City is adjacent to this land, and so a developer will look at annexing into either city based on what his opportunities are to develop. So
correct.
there's lots to consider when you're looking at that. Just
Well, maybe, so at this point though, we need to start defining more, and this is definitely going to be our hardest, which is why we started with it. How does everybody else feel about the idea of a cluster ordinance and maybe bringing that before the council to fill them out before we really dive into it? Maybe it's a good idea to say, look, this is something that we think would fit this area and we'd like to really explore it more, and have Ryan present it to the council and get their take on it and go from there.
I'm always the one that I don't want any high density. I don't want any, I'm the, what is it? The NIMBY lady, but
Yeah.
I really do think that this cluster ordinance is a really interesting idea, because it is that idea of you have to give a little to get a little.
Mm-hmm.
And I myself would love to hear more and see what the city council thought of that.
Thank you.
Meg, can you hear me?
Yes.
This is Evan. I was just wondering, when you're talking about the cluster ordinance, are you thinking that we would designate an area that requires a cluster approach, or it's just an option for that particular area?
No, I think we're thinking we would require it. That would be what we see in the conservation area as development. It would be a certain density with the cluster ordinance.
Hey, Steph, this is Neil.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, that's what the developer has proposed, is a clustering type arrangement here. And John can correct me, but you might be able to accomplish the same thing via a development agreement, or, as Dan suggested, a cluster ordinance. We just have to find some good leadership in the city to make it happen.
Yeah, but there was a lot in that proposal. I know he had like 4 different areas with different types of housing, and it had a lot. And so, and I also know that he was also wanting to go above the power lines, which I'm not in favor of.
This is Christina.
Yeah.
I just was thinking, is there a way to write in an option where they can do that, the trade, I don't remember, where we, instead of having the high density up right next to the conservation area at the top of the hill, move the high density down to the center of the city and do that swap in addition, in correlation with this? I don't know what I'm talking about, but is that what we're saying, or are we assuming that there would be high density right up next to the conservation area?
I think we're assuming that it would be higher. I don't know about high per se. That's what we need to decide. But if I'm understanding it right, we're saying development up on that area. If we imagine it done in a cluster area, which does make it more high density in those clusters, in small patches, therefore opening up more land that will be undeveloped, because we're allowing higher density in smaller areas as like a little pocket of, rather than building across the entire, am I explaining this right? Does that make sense, Christina? I don't think we were talking, I don't think this area, I don't know that this developer would be interested in the transferable option.
Yeah, the TDR.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I just didn't know if, are we writing this ordinance just for this one Marriott area, or are we writing it for multiple conservation areas in the city?
This would actually, what we're doing tonight is identifying the conservation area of our map, the whole green area. So this would technically apply to the entire green area that we have marked out as a committee seeing conservation. It does kind of fall under just this developer because the rest of it is pretty much not able to be developed. It's already the foothills, the grade is too steep for any kind of a development. So it does technically fall on there, you know. So I guess Neil, Mayor Ruby, sorry, you'd have to tell me if it's, would it be better to make a zone with that, or to just wait and try to put it into the development agreement? I don't know.
Sorry, I had to unmute. That'd be a question probably for John. I think if it's by ordinance, you surely don't want to do that just for one piece of property. It'd be an ordinance that would be probably applicable to all developments of a certain nature. You know, you kind of hate to really develop ordinances just for individual single situations, but John could probably chime in from a legal standpoint on that. But once again, you can accomplish some of the same things with a development agreement, which is kind of the direction I think, John, we were looking at and talking to the Marriott group.
That's correct, Mayor.
So John, what do you suggest for us then in hearing our ideas, how we see that in moving forward as a committee with the conservation, with the area we have marked out as a conservation zone?
So I think a good thing might be to talk about the properties in 3 different categories. And what I mean by that is some of these areas that are green already have a development agreement in place. Some of them, there's one being proposed, and others, there's nothing being proposed. And so if we look at it from that way, we might be able to focus the efforts on focusing on those where are the highest priority, and looking at, is the development agreement the right vehicle, incorporated with the work that Rob and the planners are doing on the sensitive lands, you know, making sure that we're covering our bases, but also leaving things flexible enough for the things Meg and Julie are talking about, you know, finding creative ways to make the hillside work for everybody.
Okay. I understand what you're saying. I guess I was under the impression that we were to look at the map of the city, identify zones for, you know, looking 20 years in the future, whatever, not worry about really what's on it now, but what we see it being built as, and we, you know, we start identifying those and then defining them.
Yeah, and sorry, so yeah, what I was trying to say is looking at those, because those areas that are having a development agreement proposed would obviously be the ones that this group should be making a recommendation on what that density should be, as well as on these that are conservation areas, making a recommendation on what that conservation should look like. And so, you know, if the clustering is something the group likes, then drawing a little box and saying, hey, we like the density of 1 unit to the acre, but we want 20% of the acres developed and 80% left open. And so that's the clustering type approach. Or in another, you might say, well, we like, so many numbers of units per acre, but we like the pole patch model where it's large homes on large lots spread out, because we think that works best in this area. So it is that same recommendation of a zone recommendation, but it's also adding the conservation component of, we're talking about this many units in this area, but we also see this developing in this way, and the city would work or focusing on with them, if that makes sense.
Okay.
And I can see how that carries over to places like talking about wanting to preserve the creek. That idea of density versus how much conservation area you're given, building along the creek and saying, if you build this size of lot or whatever, you have to give this amount of space between your home and the creek or whatever, or this much trail access.
Well, my question is, are we just going to say, okay, we're going to designate a specific area, or can we just say we look at this green area as our conservation area? And while we know there are some people that are already in the process, this is how we see it, and apply it to the upcoming stuff. That, John, I think that's where I'm confused a little bit. Can we just apply it across the whole area, or do we have to get very specific on the areas that we can do it, or just apply it? I don't know, Steph, if that's what's going through your head.
That's kind of what's going through my head. I'm kind of at a little bit of a, like, okay, so
yeah,
what's the next step? What's the next step? But we've got to start getting things done and moving forward. We can't keep revisiting and hashing, and if that makes sense.
So, John, that's what I'm asking. Can we just apply it and say, we understand there are places that are already in place, but this is how we see for what's not been developed yet. Can we do it that way, John?
So the group can make the recommendation for the conservation, and then in that recommendation say that there's one option for conservation, or there's three options. And what I mean by that is, the clustering is that one form, but I think the group could say, this is what we're recommending for the whole green area, and we only want one option, which is absolute no development, or we're okay with clustering, or you know what I mean? So you can make that distinction. It's just, you're going to want to further define it in your recommendation, so the planning commission and council have something to bounce ideas around with.
Okay, that's how I see it. Is, we have this idea, but we see clustering in this area and this area and this area, but the rest of it we want to kind of keep it to what is the zone for that area. Yeah, that's kind of how I see it. So, and I think John most probably has something good to say too. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
Me?
Yes, you.
Okay. I think this process needs to move faster.
Thank you.
The city has said they're not going to allow any developments till we get this recommendation in. And we've been talking most of the night tonight about an area outside of the city, mostly, when we have some areas in the city that we ought to move forward with. That on this future land use map, there's two areas that are designated as conservation areas and for high density housing. I also agree that within the city, we ought to be looking at these stream beds and stream flows for open areas for the public, which, as John mentioned, you can have development agreements with the developer. But I think that we need to look at, in the city proper, what we want to do with land use and get that to the Planning Commission City Council so they can move forward with developments. And we have two areas, like I mentioned, on the future land use map that say they're conservation areas. Just my feeling that I think we need to move forward about some things the council can deal with.
Yeah, I agree. But the task I was told we were given was to get the zones down, the zones defined, and that area, even though it is Weber County, it is part of our zoning map and part of our defined area. And so that's why we're kind of stuck on it. And it is also one of the agreements that has been already presented to the city council. So even though it's Weber County now, it's going to come back and be annexed in, and the more prepared and more defined we already have that, I think that that's really important. But I agree we need to get moving on it. And that's why I'm like, okay, so I think we all agree that we like the clustering and conserving that area. So John, at this point, do you think that we should take that to the council and make sure we're on the same page? And then we can define clustering more? Or what do you suggest? I think we're defined as far as we're comfortable with on this tonight, though.
I think that's a good thing. And I think, with that communication, we ought to include some of the stuff that Rob has put together about clustering. So I think that's a good next step to kind of give the council that update.
Okay, so do we need to make a motion to have Ryan take that to the council? Is Ryan on tonight? He is not, is he?
Do you want to take it to the council? Ryan, yeah. I think, judging from our experience, it either needs to be Ryan or Rob that take this to the city council.
Well, they do the, Ryan actually gives them an update at every city council on what we've been discussing.
Yeah.
So I think it would simply just fall under that, like they're looking at the conservation and they like clustering, they'd like, and I think we just like their feedback and we can move forward with that at that point.
Right. I just think Ryan ought to be the one to do that. If they have any questions of us, then they can ask.
Yeah, Ryan, John, thanks for reminding me. Ryan sent me a communication earlier. His brother's basement's flooding, so he's over helping him, so has to be excused.
But absent Ryan doing it, then Rob, somebody on the staff ought to be taking it instead of us.
Yeah, no, I think it'll just be Ryan in his regular council update. He gives them an update, and I think it would just be Ryan in that regular update at this point. On this, and I can take a minute and meet with him before the next city council meeting and tell him about that. And then we can take one night very soon specifically and maybe have Dan present a little bit more, and we can come in prepared to define what that looks, clustering, and kind of tackle this a little bit more and really define it. I think we all knew the conservation area would be the toughest.
Yeah, if they're not interested in clustering, then there's no sense us pursuing it. But I think they will be. But
I do too. But I think it would be in our best interest to kind of just take that and move forward. I don't think we're going to need to do that with any other zones. I think the other zones we can go through fairly quickly and identify how we see those and give them a definition and move quickly through those. The conservation is for sure the hardest.
So as a committee, you might want to all think about what areas you would want to be identified as open space, which in turn would then give a possible overlay district in the general plan that would allow the developer to cluster. So I think as a committee, maybe we can kind of look at some of these areas that we think are sensitive and that we want community access to. And then we can then implement a strategy to look at the cluster ordinance.
Isn't the TDR thing kind of the same concept? If people want to develop more, they can buy somebody else or trade somebody else's area.
Yeah, but it doesn't give a developer the right to cluster. Usually.
But it gives him an opportunity to increase his development in general by trading it off for someplace else.
That's correct, John.
There was places in our downtown and Southtown area where we could do TDR. I think a TDR would work down there, but I think up on our mountains, we need some kind of conservative, like some conservative development or easement or whatever, defining the cluster areas, the sensitive areas, like Dan said. And then when we go into the downtown area, we did define 2 areas that we felt like if they were developed out, that maybe this area could stay more green and we could do some trading. So.
Yeah, we've definitely identified our TDR areas. And I think the overlay though would come after the zoning, correct? An overlay zone that comes, we need to get our basic zones down.
We could adopt them both at the same time.
Yeah.
Okay. So I guess that's something that we can start looking at. Let's get this in, we'll have Ryan talk to the council, we'll get a feel, and we'll pursue the clustering idea and the cluster overlay and how that looks to us up on the hill.
I like that.
Does everybody agree with that? I don't believe that needs a vote or a motion or anything. That's just us moving forward on the conservation. And then I'm hoping that once we get okayed by the council, we can take one night and make a commitment that we will define it and finish it and come up with a motion at that time to get the conservation done and defined. Okay, so then let's move on in our agenda to number 5, discussion on the definition of low and high density zones. So this, I don't think that this will be nearly as complicated. Maybe let's start with the low density zone, because that is what comes right under where we've got the conservation. That's going to be the higher areas. And I've lost my page because I started skipping through the general plan to read what that is. John, do you have that you could, let's fight to find what our higher density definition is right now.
Let's see, I've got the general plan open.
I've got the book in front of me. I'm flipping through it furiously trying to find where it went.
Page 18.
Thank you. I'm in this, yeah, I'm.
Doing great, Steph. Just breathe.
This book is so massive. I can't wait till we can kind of bring it in a little bit. Okay. Thank you, Rob. That took me right where I needed to go. So right now in our general plan for high density or low density, excuse me, low density residential, typical single family development with homes built on lots with 8,000 square feet and larger. Densities will be in the range of 1 to 6 units per acre. And we have that. Lynn, will you pull that map back up again, the one that we just had up, so we can look at the area that we as a committee defined as low density?
Yeah, give me just one sec.
No problem. So John Call, in going through this, and we come up with low density would you like us to start to look at the zones that are considered low density and what those standards are?
I think that would be helpful, because I think that's the areas where we have the biggest concern and, or not biggest concern, but where most of our residents live is in those low density areas. And so if we're further defining that low density into, we see this is RE20 and this is R110, I think that will help eliminate some of those struggles in the future. And so it's kind of all that yellow area.
Yeah.
And then even, even some of the others, but it allows, by whittling it down, then we're taking low density and dividing it into other categories, because we don't have a substantial amount of acres. Understand I'm saying acres, not units, but acres of medium and high density as defined in the general plan. So if that, yeah.
Okay, so this would be zones RE20, let's see, the 8, 10,
And 12.5.
So John or Rob, we don't have the RE20 anymore.
We do still have it.
Okay, just
In
wondering.
fact, I believe the majority of the city is still currently zoned RE20. I think, although, or at least it's the majority of the developed portion, if that makes sense.
okay. So do we see, does anybody, I guess, what we need to decide then is if we would like to see changes, what those changes would be.
Steph, are you talking like right now a single lot at 8,000 with 1 to 6 units, which is kind of, I believe that's an R18 if I'm not mistaken.
Mhm.
Are we talking about defining these yellow areas with that kind of density, or do we want it to be a little bit higher density?
Well,
Like
it's,
an R110 or an R12.5?
that's what we need to decide. So
Okay.
that's why I took the big map so that we as a committee could kind of break it down as to how we see it. So now we need to break them down. We need to look at just low density, what we've identified as low density and what that is. And I guess what the definition of that is to us. And if that differs from what we've got already in the general plan, and if so, how? So in knowing that low density right now in the general plan reads the 8,000 square feet and larger, does anybody see anything different? Do we see low density having a different meaning, a different definition, looking to anything different in those areas?
I personally don't, other than like the area that's there between Pleasant View Drive and Lowman View Drive. We've already got a development. Is it that one or the next one up? Lowman View Drive, excuse me, to Alberta Drive.
Mm-hmm.
We've already defined one of those as an R110 and the others are larger. So I think what's already in place in that area is most probably great. Up above, that might be, I don't know. To me, it looks, I don't know that it would change it any.
Yeah, I'm pulling it up right now. So John, are we, in talking about cleaning this up, defining, are we wanting to keep all of those zones? Are you looking to narrow it down? Do we want all that many zones? And do we need, you know, to start going through those? I guess I'm a little confused here. I just want to make sure that we're working towards what you want to see our committee accomplish.
So Lynn, I know I didn't ask you to do it, but do you have the zoning map available?
Yeah.
And it'll be a little hard for this group in the sense that we're going to move to the different map and we've now lost the green conservation area that we've already talked about.
And I think that's fine. I think we all understand where the yellow is and the area we've specified as what we see as low density. So I just need to know how we can best move forward here.
I think what would be most helpful is to look at the areas that are not HP 1, 2, or 3 at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And those areas that are the blues and pinks and yellows that are undeveloped, and say, what do we see as the density here? You can see that we've got a lot of R110, and we also have a lot of RE20. Most of the R110, which is the yellow color, is currently developed, but there are a few pieces in there that are not. And then most of the RE20 is a good portion of it is undeveloped. It's still being farmed in several cases. And so the question is, are there any areas in the RE20 that you see being more dense, or in the other areas the same thing? And the reason I say more dense is because RE20 is the least dense zone we have, right? And then in the other areas, the R18s and the R110s and the R112s, do we see that as the right moving forward? And in particular, focusing on those areas where there's currently not houses being built, and then also looking at some of these county islands. You know, what's the general plan recommending for the zone density there? Because when those properties come in via annexation, what the general plan says is low density, and it doesn't say 10,000 square foot lots or 12,000 square foot lots. It just says low density, and that's basically everything from 5,000 square foot lots to 1 acre. And so it's just refining that in a little closer, so that when someone comes and buys a house next to an empty field, or even just an empty piece of ground that isn't even being farmed, they have the chance to look at the general plan map and say, okay, I know someday that property will be 10,000 square foot lots. I'm on a 10,000 square foot lot, and so I know what's coming. And the idea is that decision's made now. It's not made in 15 years when the developer comes in, but that decision is based on making sure these neighborhoods are working and flowing together. Because as you can see, the majority of the city right now is R110 and RE20. Those are the two biggest zones we currently have. And we have a lot of lots in the R110 zone that are bigger than 10,000 square feet. And we have a lot of lots in the RE20 zone that actually are smaller than 20,000 square feet. Or I shouldn't say a lot. There are some lots. Anyways, it's really about picking what those undeveloped areas are going to be in 5, 10, 15 years now, so that the council makes the decision, long before, so that the planners and the engineers can put the infrastructure in place. Sorry, that was a really long answer.
No, that's okay. I guess I'm a little bit frustrated because I feel a little bit unprepared for that, because I thought that I understood that we were going through and not kind of not going with what there is now. We were getting caught up on that. And so it was kind of just, how do we see the city now? And in 20 years, how could you see it developing out? And so that's why we did the other map where we had all defined what we saw as low density. And so
Right.
I would have pulled this back up. And so I just want to make sure that we're just being productive. That's
Yeah, and what I'm you're right. This is a bad example because this is showing what it's zoned now. But what I think we're looking for is to take that other map that is these, I'm going to call it a rainbow because there's these big sweeping areas, and look at it and say, okay, the yellow is low density. Let's divide it up so that we're making property line or street adjustments to define. In this area of the yellow, we're doing R110. In this area of the yellow, we're doing R18.
okay.
And-
That makes
Yeah.
that makes sense to me.
Yeah, so sorry, you're right. This was a bad example. It's this type of detail that we want added to the other map,
Okay.
but not the exact same detail, if that makes sense.
Oh, what's this future land use map that we got distributed? Who prepared that, Rob?
That is just what is in our general plan now.
Because it's got two, high density, basically conservation areas or high density markings in it.
So,
Excuse me, low density.
so let me just explain a little bit about how this works. So the general plan is an aspirational document, and it is just that, it's a general plan. And the implementation of that plan is done in many instances through the zoning ordinances that we currently have. So the ranges that are in there provide some flexibility in a range of zones that are available within those designations. And I think what John is asking for is a little more specificity with respect to what does low density mean? Maybe you create some additional categories instead of just low and then lump everything from R15 all the way to RE20, but you end up with some other designations that would provide a little bit a better definition with respect to some of these things. I just would like to point out that density does not guarantee quality of development. And some of our very best developments are R15 projects.
This is Christina. Can I just, I feel like a little bit caught off guard as well to come up with this kind of detail of the picture we're looking at right now with that map that we already made, the rainbow map. That to me would take hours and hours, and maybe even driving by all of these areas to want to switch this map around at the detail that's already there. I feel like that rainbow map that we made took a lot of time, and to make it this detailed might require an entire meeting itself. Is that just me?
No, I think I'm feeling that too. I'm feeling a little bit like, okay, because I want to keep moving forward. I want us to be making and having discussions that accomplish things that keep us moving forward in the right direction. And so I'm just, Julie.
So Steph, I'm kind of the same way. But in listening to what Rob just said, I think maybe when we come to defining like what we see, low density, medium density, high density, maybe, this is just an example, is that low density would be our R15s and our R18s. Our medium density is our R110s, our 12.5. And I think that would be a good place to start, because then we can look at this map or the map that we did ourselves and go, okay, so this is medium density and this is high density. And then that way we're defining, we're not adding any new zonings or anything like that, we now want an R19 or whatever. we still go with the zones that we've got, but we're now defining it into those specific areas. So like you've got and this is just on the west side, up there where it's got Weber County in the middle of it. That's an area where R110 was agreed upon. So that would be low density, that whole area there. But you know, there's some other places where you see low density that hasn't been developed, that is in an area where there's higher density. So then you could define this specific area. At least that's kind of, I think, the easiest way to start. But I think Christina and you are right. This isn't something we can just sit here now and say, okay, this area is where we want low density. This is where we want high density. I think maybe we need to add that medium density in there, so we can look at all of the ones and say, these need to be a little bit, you know, low on the low end, and this needs to be, I don't know. I think we're trying, this is going to be very specific. And I think maybe where we need to start is defining what we see as low density. Is it R18 and R15? And then, not R18, excuse me, R110 and RE20, that kind of stuff. And what is high density? And then we can start plugging into these areas. Otherwise, we're just going to be going around in circles tonight.
Yeah, I know. That's where I'm like, okay, I don't want to spin our wheels.
So I think Christine,
we're all busy. I know that we're all working so hard to try to do and make sure that we're coming up with the right things and moving forward. So low density
to be like another meeting. Maybe we can all sit down and for ourselves define what we see as, for me, like high, medium, and low density within our city and where we see it. And then when we share all our plans, I think you'll find we most probably pretty much all agree on where.
I agree. I'm thinking, what I guess I'm running through my head is we really did a good job. I love our rainbow map, and I think we've made that very clear. So now maybe we need to look at the low density zones. Let's not worry about where they're at. Let's look at the low density zone definitions and what those say. Let's not worry about where they're at. Let's look at the definitions. And then once we've narrowed in those definitions and said, yes, we agree with the R18, and then we can sit down at the next meeting and quickly and easily plug those into the areas that we've already defined as low density. Does that sound like something that we might be able to move forward on? Medium density, because right now, unless we all understand what each of those zones mean, it's not going to be a productive conversation, because we're all just going to, does that make sense? Are you guys with me? Does anybody have any?
I'm very much with you.
Okay, because I'm open for suggestions. I just want to,
no, I feel super overwhelmed with the idea of looking at the map and thinking, how do I see it when I don't know all the areas?
I want to make sure that we know what we're doing and that we're discussing things that we understand. So maybe we need to take some time, and at the next meeting, we start it with going over those zones. Let's identify those now, what zones we need to go through so that they can get emailed out and we can read them and understand what they look like.
Yeah, do we want to do like someone takes a zone and does like homework on it and puts together an email and sends it out, or all of us separately do it?
I think that would be great. I mean, when we did that with whatever that we put together when our committee first got together, we did such a great job, and I loved that. And I think that might be a really great way to move forward and get some things done quickly. Julie?
Can I just throw something out there just to make it really easy for you?
Uh-huh.
Having had to study these for different reasons, to me, anything R110 and up is low density, and anything that is R18 or R15 is low density.
Yeah, but if we're gonna have to sit down as a committee and identify what areas of the map we see as those, we've got to know the difference between them.
Yeah,
So I
agree.
realize, yeah, that's a lot. So let me go back to the zones.
Steph, can I just, real quick, a sentence? The rainbow map we made, there were several white areas where we just, I think it was labeled like remains the same.
Yes.
So if we're sticking with that, then this map that was just barely up, the polka dotted map, the original zoning map, that one is not as streamlined. It's definitely mix and match. So are we in favor of keeping what was there before? If it's not broken, don't fix it.
Well, I think the white will fall into this low medium density. So it will, as we understand what those zones are, I think it will help us to be able to identify the yellow ones based off of looking at the white and knowing that we've already decided we like those zones and how they sit. I think it will help us to identify the yellow areas. But I think we first all need to understand what the actual zones in low density mean and what they are. Because once we do that, then we can look at the white map that we've already said, we like how this looks and how this flows in our city. Oh, well, this is this zone and this is this zone. So I think that's actually going to give us a good gauge to expand on the yellow areas.
Yeah.
Once we understand these zones, I think by having that white area already identified as an area that we like based on its current zoning, I think it will help us to use that as a reference.
Is there, general question here, is there any way of labeling it two different zones? Like it could be this or this?
I believe so. Is there, John? Call?
Yeah, we can do it that way. We're just it moves a little more away from vesting the general plan, but it's still easy to incorporate into the document.
Well, and that's good to know, because I don't know if we want to vest it, then maybe we kind of stay with the idea of let's look at one zone, or maybe we start with a little, well, but we definitely come down and identify one zone. Okay, so we've got how many zones in low density? R18. And I say we just put R18A and R18AG together. Do we have anyone volunteering to do the R18?
Yeah, I wanted to do that one. And then like you said, we're including R18AG.
Yes, there's R18, R18A, and R18AG.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Okay, and that's Meg?
Yes.
I thought so. Just making sure. Okay, and then we've got R110. Do we have anybody who'd like to take the R110?
Yeah, if it's Julie, I will.
Okay. And then we've got the R1 12.5. Does anybody? Okay, I will.
Which one is it? It's what?
R1 12.5. And once I know who's getting what, I will send you the link to where all that is.
Well, I have no problem doing that one too. So put me down for R112.
Okay.
0.5-5.
R-1-12.5.
Yes, I will do those.
Can I just ask, more specifically what the assignment is. Are we going back to look at what's currently zoned at that, or just checking what this meaning is?
No,
Tell me again.
yeah, I want you to go through the zoning of what its standards are, what it means, what it's, so that you can give us a quick explanation about it. And then once we've all done that and we've gone through the zones, then we can look at the map and hit the yellow areas and have a better discussion, because we'll know what the zones are and what they mean.
Yeah, for me, even going back to the conservation zoning, I don't have a full understanding of what zoning standards are. So this will be good for me to do some homework on what zoning standards are.
So I wanted to let you all know that we have a table that compares all the development standards for these zones. So that might be something that'll be helpful to you.
Okay, that would be great.
Yeah, Rob, just email that to all of us.
Will do.
Yeah, and this way we can just come back prepared. We at least will have someone in our committee who can say, this is exactly what this zone means and this is what it looks like. So as we go forward, we can quickly identify those areas. We're getting hung up on this, and I feel bad because it's nice when we can get things accomplished. So I want to make sure that we can do that.
Hey, if I can help move things along, I'm
Yes.
happy to, and I know we're talking about low density zoning, but I would be happy to provide input on commercial and high density zoning stuff that I think that I'd be happy to give my interpretation of the current code and participate in that.
Okay, do you guys think at the next meeting we can tackle high and low density?
Yeah, I think we can.
Okay, let's do
I
that.
think we
then.
have to. We
Yeah,
gotta get
I
moving.
agree. I agree, Dan. I agree. But I just,
Got it laid out.
if we come back next month and we're like, okay, we are going to finish this meeting with two, we're going to have this done and ready to go to the council. I'm all for that. I just want to make sure we don't get stuck on any tangents. Okay, let's do high density then. And those zones are, well, wait, did we finish on the low? No, we've got R2 residential. That would probably be considered medium, correct?
Or what?
R2 residential zone.
That's a new one.
I am just going to.
Help us, Rob. What's the breakdown?
R2 is duplexes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so that would be kind of on the borderline of low, medium, getting into
Be
our
medium.
higher.
It'd be medium.
Yeah. Okay,
Yeah.
so you know what? I'll take R2 and R3 and 4. Those
That
are
would
all
be,
multifamily.
yeah, so 4 goes from medium to high, and then
Okay,
anything above 4 goes into high, probably.
and so Dan, would you want to do the residential city centers? Well, no, would you want to just do the R4 maybe?
Sure.
The
I would.
higher density, and then if we can get that tackled, we can do the mixed zone and commercial together, I think, as well. So we'll do
Yeah.
those two zones at the next meeting, and then we will tackle conservation.
Yeah, and R4 and mixed use and commercial all should be, they have to all interconnect.
They're all gonna.
because-
So Dan, you weren't here for our rainbow map though, but if you look at that, we as a committee went through though, and so we've got the higher density off of Washington is commercial,
Right.
and then it goes out to mixed use, and then it goes out to higher density. We're building off of Washington out. So that's kind of what we've got set up there. And
Well, yeah, and I'll be happy to give input on all of that part of it and
okay.
respond before next month's meeting.
I missed R15. We've got R15. Is there anybody else? And if you don't have time, I mean, that's great, but if there's anyone else who can volunteer to maybe look at one of the zones and present it to us next month.
Yeah, I can. Steph, I didn't hear that number. Could you tell me again?
R-1-5.
Okay, sure.
Great, thank you. Okay.
Sorry, this is Christina.
No, that's okay. I figured that out. So we've got, all right. So I think we've got a plan. If we come back understanding those zones, it's going to make it a lot easier to open it up and look at it and have an understanding of what exactly those zones mean and what we're putting down. And we'll get low density, high density done. I'd like us to end with a couple of motions because we, really come ready to define those.
Hey,
And
Steph, did you get MPC? I'm sorry.
no, because
No.
that will fall when we do the MPC, when we do commercial and mixed use. I
Okay.
think we're going up to R4, which has a little bit of possible mixed use. But I think that's going to be for the, we'll move to the MPC and the commercial at the next meeting. This next one's going to be low and high density. All right. I think that, okay, I'm feeling a little bit better now. I'm back on track. I got a little overwhelmed for a moment there, like, oh man. I want us to make sure that we're being productive because I know that we're all really I love getting together. So go ahead.
I think you've been great, Steph. I really got some I mean, honestly, the clarity on the first and Dan's addition, really, I have so much clarity on what I need to go do right now. I'm itching to go look up standards now because I think it will give me direction on both a conservation zone and the rest of the city.
Yeah, and I'm actually feeling a lot better on conservation too. As it's nice to have a plan moving forward. I think that makes a huge difference. All right. Well, with that kind of being our discussion on those zones, we will move on to number 6, committee staff mayor comments. So do we have any comments from anybody?
Jeff, can I just share something?
I would love it if you did. Thanks.
I appreciate what everybody's done tonight. There is a bill running through the House right now called HB 98, which Meg is very much aware of. It went to committee today and it was passed with some very slight changes. This one is where if the city can't provide, what is it now? Meg, help me out here. If they can't
Home
provide
inspection?
an inspection within a certain days, that then the particular builder can go out and find his own one to do the process for him. And it went into the committee, it went into the, which one did it go into? I can't remember. Anyway, it went into one of the subcommittees and it passed out with unanimous, with a couple of changes that I don't think changed anything. And I just wanted to make you guys aware of that because this is what we're doing. We're trying to make sure that we protect our city. So I just kind of wanted to share that with you. So
Just
Julie,
between us, KSL's doing a big piece on it.
thanks, Meg.
yeah, Julie, the emphasis seems to be on the inspection part, but another thing is it prohibits cities, at least the original bill, from requiring certain building standards in regards to, brick, rock, roof pitch.
They didn't touch that. I believe that's still in there, Mayor. So yeah, we need to, I think it's something as citizens we need to be on top of.
Well, the chances of getting defeated are probably minimal because there's a high propensity of developers and realtors and builders in the legislature.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
the chances of it passing are probably pretty great.
Yeah, but I just wanted to make people aware that it has already
Yeah.
passed through one. Despite it sat for 23 days while they messed around with it and didn't make much in the way of substitutions, but they did. I listened to the hearing tonight and there was some good things brought up, but they just kind of let them go by the way. So I just kind of wanted to let you as a committee know, it's good to kind of watch what's going on the Hill, because it could very easily affect the decisions that we're making. I mean, this one won't particular, but at the same time, we have a lot of building going on in our city. We want to make sure that it's inspected right. So, that they're not just using their friends and they're passing it off. So,
And I think a big part why the committee should be aware, Julie, really good idea, is it's being said to help with the housing crisis, that it's supposed to help get more people into homes
Yes.
because the costs will be lower. And
they believe
so,
that.
that's one of the things that we had to tackle as a committee before.
Yeah, and they believe that. They absolutely believe that. That was this last statement that was made in the committee hearing today. So that is something they believe. And then I just have one other question that was presented to me, and maybe you guys can answer this for me. When we do our road extension that's coming up here really fast down on Washington Boulevard, I know we're lining up, I think it's 450 East with Smith's entrance so that they're not offset. Someone asked me if they're putting a traffic light in there. And I said, I don't know, but they made a comment that a lot of people are going to want to go across 4 lanes to go straight across into Smith's. And so they said, just bring it up anytime you can. It is a concern if there's no light there. So just bringing that to the committee's attention. I'm
There's no
done.
plan for a light there, so.
Okay, well, that's just something that was brought up by somebody that I'd be working on it. And it was a very big concern he had, is the fact that now that, it's like a cross street, that people are going to try and get across 4 lanes of traffic that is very busy. And so they just were like, that was the question I was asked, has it been considered? And I said, I have no idea. So Mayor, thank you for that update. I will let that person know. So I'm done.
Okay. Thanks, Julie. Yeah, and we're going to be working on the affordable housing plan for the city. We need to be working on that to update this year as well. So, okay.
So I have something, Steph.
Yeah.
So we've been asked by the council to change the name of this committee to the General Plan Advisory Committee. If you just real quickly, in real estate, there's a term called racial steering or redlining, where real estate agents only take people to neighborhoods that they deem as appropriate for minorities. So minority families are steered to certain neighborhoods. Because this committee deals with land use, someone's recommended we take steering out of the name, and the council's asked us to do that. So we're going to change that to the advisory committee. That's a correct name, right?
I approve of that, John.
I do as
Good.
well.
That's good clarity.
Inclusion.
So that's it. Just letting you know that we will be updating that.
It will now be the GPAC.
The GPAC?
Yes. Okay, I'm just gonna let that drop right now and we'll move on to Rob. Scott, do you have any comments?
Go for the A+ grade, the GPA.
Okay. I like that. Evan, do you have anything to add?
I do not. Thank you.
All right. Mayor, did you have anything? I know it's,
I'm unmuting. No, just thank you for trying to help us move along, and we're excited to get some recommendations.
we'll get some your way. We have a small one coming your way. Some progress. So
All right, look forward to it.
with that, thank you, everybody. And we'll look forward to hearing about the zones and moving forward on the map. So with that, we have any, pardon me, Julie?
Yeah, it's a motion. So I'm just going to motion that we adjourn the meeting when you're
Thank
done.
you. I was just going to say, do we have a motion? Do we have a second?
Second.
All right. Then that is the end. And thank you again, everybody. We'll talk to you next time.